Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of My JavaScript Story. This week we're talking to Jamund Ferguson. Jamund, do you want to say hi?
Hi everybody.
Now, it's funny because of all of our guests, I've probably met about 20% in person, and you're one of that 20%, right? Because you used to live here in Utah.
Yeah, I used to live in Utah for a couple of years, and I think we worked together for, a matter of weeks, maybe. At one point, I probably saw you at the JavaScript meetups there in Utah too when I was living there.
Yeah, I kind of started getting into JavaScript about that time period. You mentioned that we had worked together at Rain. And the funny thing is that when I applied to Rain, somebody had told me they were looking for full-time Ruby people. And so I went in for the interview. And at the end of the interview, they looked at me and they said, "You know, this is a contract, right?" And I was trying to go freelance anyway, so I was like, "Of course I did."
Nice.
And anyway, so then they looked at me, and I was totally green. I had no idea about freelancing at all. So they look at me,
You
and they
seemed really good. We thought, honestly, I remember thinking, this guy's an expert. And everyone said, wow, we're really bringing in the big guns with this guy. Everyone really thought you knew what you were doing. So you did it. You impressed everyone, at least at the beginning. I don't know how it turned out in the end.
The project turned out really well. So the thing that was funny about it was that they brought me in. It was my first contract gig, and when they asked me what rate I wanted, I told them $60 an hour.
Is that it's a bit low, isn't it, really?
Yeah, my next contract I did for over double that.
I figured.
Because
I wondered they were so happy about you.
Yeah, I'm sure. All of my contractor friends were like, "Oh, Chuck, we need to talk."
It seems when you're doing contract work, and I used to do, side work and things like that. I don't do that anymore. It's too draining for me with a day job. But it always seems like, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. I can charge this much and I can pay my bills. But then you forget about all the additional costs, the tax burden. There's all sorts of stuff. Freelance work. I'm sure you could do another show about freelance work, honestly, but it's a whole different beast.
Yeah, I could do a whole nother. In fact, I did. Free plug. Folks, we have a freelancing show.
Nice.
Go check it out. Seriously. We have terrific hosts on there. They do a terrific job. And honestly, they'll keep you from making some mistakes that will cost you big money. So,
but I think going back to Rain a little bit, I think I'd like to kind of start there because that's when I really started getting serious about JavaScript.
Do you want to back up just for a second and let people know who you are?
Oh,
where you work and why you're super famous and all that stuff.
Not even any fame. I'm like zero famous. My name is Jamund Ferguson, and I have worked for the last 5 years as a UI engineer / sort of JavaScript architect at PayPal. I previously...
Is that where Kent works?
Kent C. Dodds is one of my illustrious coworkers. We worked together the entire time, the 3 years he's been at PayPal.
Next time I see him, I'll say you said he was illustrious.
Illustrious, yeah. I don't actually know what that means, but it sounded fancy, and Kent's pretty fancy. So, he's probably my most famous colleague that I had there at PayPal. So I work with Kent and James Charles, who some people might know in Utah. He used to work at Family Search, and James Charles.
Oh, James Charles.
Yep. So. He's great. He gives talks and stuff. He's definitely not as much of a self-promoter as Kent. Doesn't get out there on Twitter and everything as often, but he's great. And so I work at PayPal, work on JavaScript stuff there, both Node.js and mostly React now, though it used to be Backbone. Before that, I had a number of jobs. I worked at a place called Odesk for a couple of years. And then in Utah, when I lived there, I worked at a startup called i.tv. And before that, I worked at Rain for literally a couple of months. I got kind of burned out at that place pretty fast. But, that's a little bit about my career. So in terms of stuff, I give talks occasionally. I used to contribute to the ESLint project and was a big linting fan until I sort of...
That's what we had you on for. That was episode 162.
Episode 162, on JavaScript Jabber. So I used to talk about linting a lot, and then I sort of got into like types and flow type and just a number of things sort of, I would say, dampened my enthusiasm about that. So lately I've been focusing on, work, and I haven't been contributing as much on open source, doing as many talks. So I am doing a talk in London in a couple of months about Gatsby and the Jamstack and some of that stuff, which has kind of been something I'm really fascinated with.
Well, if you want to dry run at any of those ideas, we have a React podcast as well. So,
you
come on and just talk through it.
One-stop podcast shop.
That's us. This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
But yeah, getting back, that's about it. I've been programming professionally for about 10 years now. I don't have a degree, though. I mean, when it comes to JavaScript, it's not like anyone's learning JavaScript in college, these days anyway, right? So
heaven forbid they teach a modern language.
Hey, maybe they'll get there. But
Java might count. Maybe, kind of.
I don't know. So I'm self-taught, but I started in programming as a more of a PHP and Perl developer. So in really kind of middle school and a little bit of high school, I had some opportunities to learn Perl and PHP, started putting together web pages.
Is that how you got into programming?
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. Getting into programming is like this weird process because you sort of learn some stuff, then you learn new stuff. And it's, for someone that's totally self-taught, it's not like I was going to classes, in middle school or whatever. I'd see something, I'd want to learn it. I'd kind of dabble with it a little bit and then sort of like forget about it for a year and come back and say, oh yeah, that programming thing. And so I kind of always had an interest in how technology worked. This was sort of before the original .com boom. So I just figured if I learned this stuff, I'd be rich. I don't know. I thought I'd be some kind of millionaire or something. So I don't know. It didn't quite work out that way. But as a kid, I was growing up in the Seattle area. There was a lot of talk of Microsoft and these big tech companies. So and I had, I think I had a stepbrother who he didn't live with me, but he's kind of stepbrother. He knew about the internet, like Prodigy Online. And, I think his dad was maybe not related to me, but his dad was a programmer of some kind from Microsoft. So I had some sense of it and got a little bit of encouragement from friends there. I remember I used to go to like the bookstore in Bellevue, Washington, Tower Books. It was right next to the record store that I used to hang out a lot. And I would read those like Teach Yourself Java or Teach Yourself, I think it was Java in 21 Days books. And I think I convinced my friend to like shove it in his backpack and run out the store because those were expensive books. Like we couldn't afford the books. So I would, I was a bit sketchier in those days. So I would like steal the programming books occasionally and like read them, but I didn't actually do anything. Like I just read about it and like learn it. And it wasn't really till probably more like high school that I had one or two programming classes. And I would say like somehow ninth grade, I had this, it's really interesting. There was like a web design class that I was able to do. And somehow a friend of mine in there, we decided to start a web design company. We called it Seattle Web Design. This is like 1998, maybe 1999, something like that. We're like literally in ninth grade. I mean, I don't know, 14 years old. We started this company, Seattle Web Design. We got the website, seattlewebdesign.net. I mean, it's a good name, honestly, for totally being like super basic. I knew like a little bit of Photoshop, a little bit of HTML. We got a couple contracts, like $300 web pages that we built for people like the local Little League and like a couple places like that. But I ended up moving away halfway through that year. And so again, I was probably using like Front Page to build that stuff. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
but I was just learning and picking up things little by little. Later, I was in a different high school, Auburn, Washington, and they were teaching Perl. I mean, I don't know what kind of high school is teaching Perl programming, but they were teaching Perl. We ended up making some interesting projects, reading the dictionary and doing things with the words. And so I got sort of into programming just by picking up books, learning things, reading this and that, taking a few, classes in high school, got exposed to it. Mm-hmm. But really my jump to like learning it properly was when I was working in tech support. I was like a senior in high school, started working in tech support for this web hosting company. And they said, oh, if you want to, we want everyone to learn how our web hosting platform works. It's called Host Pro or vServers or something. They kind of changed names a few times. They said, go ahead and build a website. So I decided to build a website. And at the time, I was really into the punk rock music scene in Seattle and punk and hardcore music scene. So I started this website, northwesthardcore.com. And it was for all like the bands and stuff in that music scene. And, that's kind of how I learned. I created it so like a SQL database, and I had originally in Perl and then in PHP, people could post shows that are coming up. And
I love that.
You know what I mean? Like people could post their MP3s, which were like new at the time. Mm-hmm. And there was no like MySpace or SoundCloud or anything like that. So we had like the ability to upload pictures and files. So it really came about as there was this kind of need in that community that for how you're going to find out about upcoming concerts and how you're going to find out about these things. And the internet was sort of this like, oh, I know I can use this. And, ended up being a cool place for a couple of years for that particular music community in Seattle area to collaborate, and ended up having like a PHP bulletin board added on there. So all these things kind of, sorry, there's like a really long answer to how did you learn programming, but it's a slow process. So I sort of learned over, a number of years. And so, but doing that website kind of through the end of high school, sort of while I was in college studying environmental planning and stuff like that, I was able to learn enough of the basics that later I was able to get a job in programming PHP without too much trouble.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. A lot of folks, they come in and they're like, I don't have a degree, or, I've worked 10 years in some other field or something like that. And I mean, they're looking for the way in. And, oh, well, I can't afford a boot camp, or I can't afford to take the time off for a boot camp. And, I mean, you did it, and you did it the way that they need to do it. And that is you get in, you find a project, you learn some technology, you figure it out, and eventually you'll get good enough, somebody will hire you.
Side projects are huge. I think there are ways that if people are – I don't know, knowledgeable enough, they can jumpstart the system. I mean, it took me like you could say 10 years to learn programming. I started when I was young, but it was a long time of sort of reading things, observing things, trying things out. But if someone is really smart and focused, they can kind of jumpstart that through a boot camp or through, contributing on GitHub to the right types of projects. I mean, there are ways they can jumpstart it. But for someone that's kind of curious, I think working on a side project, build a website for your, literally I used to have a website for my mom's art projects. It was called sandysart.com. And it was just like her art stuff. These little projects, these little side projects were a great way for me to try new things and learn how stuff worked. And I think GitHub, of course, makes that whole process even easier now. You can look at all the projects out there. They even say like, hey, I need help. And that works really well. So there's a ton of ways that new people interested in programming can get started. But for me, side projects, kind of working on things that are relevant to me and my community were a great way to start.
Well, it's funny because I'm a lot the same way. I actually have a degree in computer engineering, but I'd been playing with stuff before and after college. But for me, I'm literally like 3, 2, 1 side project because I'll pull up a course, or I'll go sit in a boot camp or something, and I'll sit through a day's worth of boot camp. But the second half of the boot camp, I'm screwing around with crap, right?
Yeah, because you're curious, right? And you're learning, and you're always trying to learn new things. And so for me, a formal education is not the way that I learn. Like I was diagnosed ADHD as a kid. My brain is all over the place. I couldn't sit through classes. I got bad grades in school. The thought of me taking computer science in school, I was just like, there's no way I'm going to do this. Like, I don't like it. I don't want to deal with math. I don't want to do computer stuff. Like, I don't want to sit down. I mean, it's just kind of this whole thing in my head. It just didn't seem like something I'd be interested in. And it was only sort of necessity later. I mean, I went to school, I did environmental stuff. I'm learning about sustainability and global warming and all this stuff. And then I was like, hey, I need a job. And then I was like, oh, apparently like being like talking about environmental issues is not like a lucrative career at all. So I sort of realized at that point, and this is, I basically, to simplify this, I graduated with a degree in community environmental planning from University of Washington. I ended up serving a mission for the church and then came back, tried doing grad school at BYU. Did about a month and a half of Masters of Public Policy at BYU. And I was like hating my life so hard. First of all,
I was going to say, that sounds excruciating. I know it's some people's bag of tea, but when it comes to structure, that's not me. And that's like structure to learn structure.
Yeah. It was so rigid. And I can't, the program I was in at University of Washington was it's like all like hippies and like talking about whatever. And there's no grades even. It's just like, I mean, it's totally chill. So then like at BYU, it's so strict and it's all like economics and math. And I was like, forget this, So kind of I was sort of in this position where I'm like, well, I thought I was going to go into environmental stuff, maybe do environmental policy. Very quickly into my master's degree, I realized there's just no chance of that happening. And so I'm like, do I have another skill? Like maybe I could get a job somehow. And that's where I'm like, well, I guess I can program because I'd always been doing that on the side. And I had, part-time jobs here and there, updating websites or doing things like that. But that's kind of when I got my first job at this place called Marketecture in Utah, kind of a PHP. They wanted a PHP Perl kind of developer. I had some experience there. I mean, very little. It was using the Cake PHP framework. And so that's kind of how I got into getting up my first programming job. Was I dropped out of grad school, had no life plan, was like, I have to work, I'm about to get married, I need to do something. And, found this job doing PHP development, somehow convinced them to hire me. And really there's when I was first exposed to jQuery. And that got me excited about JavaScript. Really, that was the first time that I kind of was like, ooh, this JavaScript thing's cool.
Yep, I hear that. And it's funny too because, and I'm just going to highlight this and then we'll move on. My degree, incidentally, is also from BYU, and I served a mission as well in Italy. So we do kind of have some things in common here, but you just have to get that one job, right? You get that one job, you get that one person to hire you, and then you can parlay your way into all kinds of other things.
Absolutely. I can't emphasize this enough. It's do what it takes to get in the first. It doesn't matter if it's a bad job, a poorly paying job. I mean, this job, it was basically like
for a few months and then start looking.
This job that I got, this Marketecture, it's like I don't want to this company. It's a horrible place. I mean, they were building these like basically pop-up ads. They were trying to scam people into buying stuff. I mean, it was like they literally had a thing called Google Rags to Riches where it's supposed to be like an SEO kind of company. I mean, I don't want to diss them. They were doing about half their stuff was legit and half their stuff was like totally ridiculous. And yeah, it wasn't great. Like it wasn't the coolest job. The pay was like, for a programmer, it was pretty low, but it was also an amazing opportunity for me to learn, how to work in a real environment. That's where I learned first Subversion and then Git and kind of broke my teeth on a lot of the foundational things that would become important to me throughout my career.
Yep. 100%. That makes a ton of sense. All right, so you kind of mentioned Rain. That was where you wanted to start initially, and you were getting into JavaScript.
I changed my mind on that, thinking about this a little bit harder, because it was Marketecture where I first was exposed to jQuery.
Right.
And I was no good at JavaScript or anything like that, but we started building more interactive UIs. And what I realized is that we needed to use these jQuery widgets. And so we go to jQuery UI, download the date picker and these sorts of things. And so
that was my life.
Yeah, exactly. You go down and there's like 50 options to set it up, like so many different things. But the interesting part for me was this. My coworkers didn't want to learn that stuff very much. And so what I found to be successful in my career, and I've recently blogged about this too, if you want to check that out on my Medium page, is if you learn something that your coworkers don't want to learn, you will be it gives you a lot of value. So my coworkers were very good at doing SQL queries and PHP and server kind of development stuff and really scalable, building more scalable systems. And they were like thinking the UI was silly and in a lot of ways. And so I was like, well, let me be good at that. And so after like a year and a half of this, my first programming job, I became kind of the jQuery expert. And so I wasn't actually good at JavaScript or anything, but I understood jQuery well. And I know people say, you got to learn the fundamentals. Whatever, just learn something and get good at it.
You could answer their questions and solve their problems.
Yeah, I could answer their questions and solve their problems. So I became very useful.
Yep.
And knowing jQuery well was a good transition for me to get hired at Rain, which is doing a lot more interactive type of things.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Hey guys, let me tell you about Clubhouse. I swear, I've used every project management software there is out there, and I hated project management software. Now I have Clubhouse. Overall, it's simple and straightforward to use, but has enough of the integrations and power features you need to get the job done without getting confusing. This means that I can use it, and the non-technical members of my team can figure out what they need from it. It also makes it easy for me to zoom out and see what's going on overall before zooming back in and specifying more work that needs to be done, or picking the next task for me to tackle. They integrate with all the systems that you'd expect and have a REST API for, well, the rest. If you go to https://clubhouse.io/jsstory, you can get 2 months free instead of the standard 14-day trial for any team size. Once again, that's https://clubhouse.io/jsstory.
So what was it then that got you excited about JavaScript? Because, I mean, it's one thing to be like, this is my turf. I can be an expert here. I can own this. And as I gain more expertise, I gain more value. But that's not the same thing as loving the technology, right?
Yeah. So this is what happened. That was where it started. I got good at jQuery, and I figured out how to be a jQuery person. Let's put it that way. Understanding the quirkiness of jQuery. Then at Rain, the next place I worked, and I was only there for 10 months or so. We were working a lot more high-profile projects. I was working on some larger scale things, and it was back end and front end. Full stack. It was PHP, and then whatever HTML and stuff, and JavaScript on the front end. But as I was building more interactive stuff, I started realizing that this JavaScript thing is really important part of this. And initially myself and most people I don't think took it very seriously, and we sort of realized this is up and coming. And the big change there was around this time, it's about 2010, the HTML5 was all the rage. And so everyone at Rain was like a Flash developer, and they were all super good at that, or Flex. I don't know what all that stuff is, but they were doing the Adobe stuff, and they were really good at it. And there were also, also just some rumblings about getting into native apps, but there weren't a lot of people that were doing JavaScript and HTML5, and also mobile web was just starting to be a thing, and a lot of folks were looking at native mobile. But I was like, well, let me take on JavaScript and HTML5 and mobile web and let that be my thing. And so that's when I started, having some fun. I made some HTML5 games. I have this fish game where you can move your finger around on the phone, and the fish come, and you could eat the fish or the shark or whatever. I mean, I started experimenting with this, and I really got excited about all the things that someone could do with JavaScript, and it kind of got me pumped. And then really, I would say I started reading books, and that was the thing. When I was at just starting my career, I wasn't like obsessed with it. I wouldn't go home like after work. I was like, I'm done, goodbye. I had a baby and everything. I wasn't thinking about work. And it was around that time, towards the end of my career at Rain, when HTML5 was just, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about all the new browser things that you could do, and how to build interactive things. And I started reading, JavaScript, the good parts, and HTML5 for web designers, CSS3. I don't know, the book from A Book Apart, and some of these things. And I was just really trying to soak up all of this new technologies, these new web technologies, and really embrace them. And I also started another thing that happened during this time. Excuse me, was I started participating in meetups. And so I'd go to the meetup that was there for I don't know, what is it called? Utah JS? Yeah, Utah JS
Yeah,
meetup.
Utah JS is the one that survived. There were two groups. They sort of friendly merged, and Utah JS is what we wound up with.
The
So
Utah JS, I started going there, like Merrick Christensen and Kip and some of these folks, AJ, I mean, all those people, and would start hanging out there. Before it was Domo. It was whatever that thing was before Domo. I think we'd meet there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I started sharing some of the stuff I was working on, sharing about, mobile web and sharing some of the technologies. And so I got excited about it there. And one of my first kind of claims to fame for me personally, a huge milestone, is I was at Rain. We gotten contacted by it was like YouTube had this really cool interactive, like HTML5 video JavaScript thing that was like a what's that called, like the mousetrap thing, where like you have like a ball that rolls and it knocks over a thing, a
Rube Goldberg machine.
Rube Goldberg machine. This is interactive Rube Goldberg machine thing with video, and use JavaScript to patch all these videos here. But there's a bug in it, and I remember going through like the source code of this thing for YouTube. And at the time, I was like pretty junior engineer, and I was like, wow, this is for YouTube. Like, how can I, how could I even have anything to add to this? But there were some problems with it, and I was able to look through the source code and discover the bug. And I remember for me, that was a huge point where I felt like, wow, I must be really learning this stuff. I was able to discover a bug in something that Google made because, they're obviously so smart or whatever. So it was really, I think it may have been even the minified source code that I had to look through. It's pretty rough, but I remember finding what was wrong, being able to fix it. And that was a huge moment for me. And another pivotal moment, I think, in my JavaScript career was I got on Twitter. That agency really encouraged people to get on Twitter to see the trends in upcoming technology. And I remember when Node.js came out, and I remember telling my coworker Nate Ross, like, oh, like, this is so cool. What if you could like query the DOM like jQuery, but on the server? And somehow I was so overwhelmed with Node.js coming out. So shortly after I heard about it, at the end of 2010, I left there to go to i.TV to work full-time on Node, because at that point I was just so into JavaScript. I wanted to work on it full-time. I was ready to leave PHP behind. Didn't
Jameson Dance work there?
Yeah, right after I left, I think he worked there. Yeah, Utah is a funny place because there's it seems that like everyone knows each other. It's a really tight-knit community.
Yeah, well, I'm asking in particular about him because he was a longtime panelist on JavaScript Jabber. So.
Oh yeah.
People might be interested just to kind of see how the flow
how it all connects. Yeah. Sean Hess was the I don't know if people know him, but he was kind of the VP of technology or whatever. It was a fun little startup. It was there for about a year, but it was full time. It was just Node 0.2, so it's really old Node.js production. Initially, they wrote the whole thing in CoffeeScript, like a super early CoffeeScript. And then, I came there and I'd been reading like JavaScript, the good part. So I was demanding that everyone use semicolons all over the place and being really, kind of pedantic about stuff, because the funny thing is, you do something for like 6 months, and if no one else is doing it, you feel like you're the expert. But I really didn't know what I was doing. I just happened to know slightly more than my peers did. And so I think I had a lot of wrong-headed ideas in those days because I didn't have a lot of experience, but because I knew just a little bit more than others, people were kind of starting to listen to me, unfortunately. But I will say that was a great place to learn, to really get deep into Node, to use it from the early days, learn about all these new technologies, and really, I don't know, just embrace JavaScript. I went to JSConf around that time too, which is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's funny because I discounted Node initially because there was like Rhino and a couple of others, and I was like, what makes this so special? And then it started taking off, and I was like, okay, let's do it. But yeah.
Node's been an interesting one. I mean, I've been with it basically ever since then. I got excited about it in its early days. I stayed on. It's given me some great opportunities, but I don't think it got as big as I thought it would. I know a lot of enterprises adopted it, but I think in general, it's not. It's still a niche, and I think that it isn't. I don't get the sense that Node's growing outside of cloud functions, where I think that's actually where Node is really shining right now is in Cloud Functions and Lambda functions. And so I don't think it's really going away, but I think Node as sort of this big application layer for all your APIs, I think it's actually kind of that part of Node is kind of going away now, and maybe getting replaced with Cloud Functions or Golang and sort of different things to meet different use cases.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the Cloud Functions, like I've heard rumors that AWS is going to add a couple of languages. I know that Azure supports a number of languages with Azure Functions and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting to see where people are plugging it in now that it's kind of settled a little bit and stabilized a bit.
Right.
So, people understand what it's good at and can start to say, okay, this technology here and that technology there, like you said. So some of the stuff is going back to Golang or whatever, but a lot of the rest of it, where it's really done well, people are happy to use it.
Yeah, it works. It works well. I'll just mention, I've been with PayPal 5 years, right? And we've been focused on, basically when I started there, it was all about Node adoption, getting the Java developers ready to write Node.js applications. Yep. So because it had, it's always silly. Like at the time, it seemed like I've been doing this forever. I've been like 3 years doing JavaScript or doing Node.js. But somehow I was like, the wise expert coming in, training people. So I had a lot of, I was there just because I had a few more years experience in Node, helping bring people on board with Node, getting them excited, helping them learn best practices, how callbacks work, how, asynchronous communication works in Node. And so we did all this training. We got everyone excited about Node. We built a lot of our frontier APIs and web stack in Node. And now I see a lot of the flaws in that. And, I know this isn't that as much of a technical podcast as a career podcast, but it's interesting, I guess, for my career to say, I spent the last 5 years driving Node adoption. And this last year I started thinking, is this really where we want to keep investing? Or do we want to look at Golang? Or do we want to look at some other paradigms? Because there are flaws in this. So I guess, I'm trying to figure out, for a while I felt like, well, I'm only good at this one thing. I have a narrow niche that I'm good at. And now I'm starting to think, well, yeah, that's fine. I can learn new things too. And so maybe Node isn't the next thing that I work on. Maybe it's going to be something else. What I was proud of was working on early Node.js stuff at IDA TV. It was so new. We were breaking everything. We were constantly finding bugs. And that was just a great time for learning how all this stuff went. Since then, though, it's more about, open source projects like working on ESLint and Standard and trying to find ways to, so much of what the work I've done is trying to find ways to help developers who are unsure of how to do things correctly, help them do it correctly. So not like I built some amazing project that was so fancy. It was just more boring stuff, like how to do Node at the enterprise well is kind of the stuff that I'm more proud of.
Awesome. So what are you working on these days?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So for the last about 3-4 months, I've been really looking, and really the last year, I've been thinking about where do we go now? Our stack at PayPal is all about these fairly heavy frontier Node.js apps that act as sort of an API layer for our UI, as well as rendering stuff. And now we're moving to we've moved most of our apps to React, and so we realize we don't need such a heavy Node layer. We can simplify things quite a bit. And the way that I've been looking at it is I still find Node kind of buggy, and I'd love to move off of Node in a lot of cases and move towards something like the Jam stack, the Gatsby stack, where you basically have all your assets, like all your web pages served up from a CDN, very close to your customers, which results in extremely fast page load times. And then, from those apps living on the CDN or on customers' devices in a progressive web app, hitting, APIs, and maybe those APIs are Node, maybe they're written in Go, maybe they're in a Cloud Function, it doesn't really matter. But my thing lately has actually been trying to simplify and reduce our reliance on Node for things like rendering, which it's not super good at. And I think if we stick the rendering back to the devices, put the HTML at the CDN, things like that, I think we can have more stable systems, faster customer experiences, and things like that. So that's what I've been working on, trying to figure out how we could adopt Gatsby or similar patterns inside of PayPal.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've really been excited about the Jamstack, and between you and me and everybody else listening, we have an episode coming out on the Jamstack, I think next week as we record this, which will be this week as it comes out. So keep an eye out for that. And I've gotten really excited about it as well. I've been playing with 11D, but I've been also looking at Nuxt, Next, Gatsby.
Yeah, there are so many things. I sort of picked Gatsby. We looked also at Next.js. For what we're doing, it looks like Gatsby might be a better fit, though. It's mainly sold for static sites, and obviously everything we do at PayPal is pretty much dynamic except for our marketing pages. And so we've done a little bit of twisting and shoving to try and get it to work, but hoping to have something to announce there. I'm giving a talk at QCon in March in London about some of the work we're doing. So if you're interested, check that out.
Awesome. Well, and like I said, we had a long discussion about the difference between necessarily like a regular static site and Jamstack site. So what you may be doing may actually fit into what Jamstack is. You might just be doing a few unconventional things, but yeah.
Exactly. I think we're sort of all together as a community stumbling on the next set of best practices. We haven't exactly arrived at the terminology and exactly what we want to call it yet, but it's certainly exciting. I always love being part of the next up and coming thing. So anyway, it's been fabulous talking to you, and I'm grateful for your time, and hope everyone interested in learning JavaScript and making this career finds a lot of joy and happiness in doing it.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm excited to see just what you come up with, because solving the problems that aren't solved, that's how our field advances. Absolutely. So real quick, do you have some picks for us?
I don't have any picks. I mean, use Gatsby. That's my tech pick. Use Netlify. That's my web hosting pick. What other kind of picks? You want books? Movies?
Whatever. Books, movies, sure.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I like that. My favorite record of the year was this record called Daydream by the band Culture Abuse. Really cool band from California. And that's it for me at the moment.
All right. Well, I'm going to do some picks that are a little more indicative of how my week went. My first pick is Modern Medicine and Antibiotics.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been quite the week. I actually drove down to CES, drove back early because I was just so sick. A few other picks. Currently, I'm talking to Jamund sitting in my regular office chair. I'm sitting on a new purple pad that I just bought on that chair, and I'm really digging that. Sometimes I like sitting on it, sometimes I don't. It just depends on what I feel like. But on top of that, I'm also sitting on an inflatable donut pillow, like the $4 kind you get at Walmart.
Nice.
Yeah, that's where my distress has been the last couple of weeks. So anyway, but yeah, so I don't have any big picks because I just barely survived the last week. So but yeah, one other thing I do want to throw out there, since you mentioned Jamstack, I have been working on migrating devchat.tv over to a static site, and
cool.
And doing some of the JavaScripty stuff to pull in the other things that I want. But I'm looking for contributors, because it turns out that several of the shows at some point lost their show notes. I think it was when I transitioned to WordPress, and I think I missed it. But the other system no longer exists. I think I might still have the database somewhere, maybe. Anyway, so I've opened things up for coaching. So if you do show notes for 3 episodes or tags for 5, then I will do an hour of coaching with you. And that's like, my coaching rate's like $500 an hour. So just to give people an idea, I'm really hard to book for coaching. So, and it's just because I've got all the other things going on with the podcast. So if you're interested in that, that's a good way to get an hour's worth of coaching. So if you're trying to start a podcast or get your career started or anything like that, I am doing that. And you can find that at devchat.tv/cmaxw/devchat-11d. Jamund, where do people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter, usually twitter.com/xjamundx or www.jamund.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks for coming, Jamund.
Oh, it was a great pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. We will talk to everybody next week.
Zoopity zoop.
Yep.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.